Every financial decision you have ever made felt like a choice. It wasn't. Not in the way you think. Not controlled by someone else. Controlled by something inside you that formed before you understood what money was. And it has been running every calculation, every negotiation, every purchase, every avoidance, silently, automatically, faster than conscious thought, ever since. In 2002, Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in economics. He was a psychologist. He had never taken a single economics course in his life. He won it for proving that human beings are not rational economic agents, that the model on which the entire global financial system was built was wrong about its most basic assumption. The assumption that people make financial decisions by rationally weighing costs and benefits. That given enough information, humans choose what is best for them. They don't. We don't. And the proof isn't philosophical. It's experimental, reproducible, and deeply uncomfortable. Before we go into the experiments, we need to establish something. The hidden variable is not stupidity. It is not weakness. It is not lack of information. It operates identically in Nobel laureates and in people who never finished school, in billionaires and in people who can't pay rent. It does not discriminate by intelligence or education. It is structural. It is part of how the human brain processes uncertainty. And uncertainty is what every financial decision involves. In 1979, Kahneman and his collaborator Amos Tversky published a paper called Prospect Theory. It would become one of the most cited papers in the history of economics. The paper described something they called loss aversion, and it is the hidden variable. Loss aversion is simple to describe and almost impossible to override. The pain of losing something is approximately twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining the equivalent thing. Lose $100. The emotional impact is roughly equivalent to gaining $200. Not 100, 200. This asymmetry is not a quirk. It is a feature. It was built by evolution into every human nervous system over millions of years. In an environment where losing resources meant death, the brain that weighted losses more heavily than gains survived longer, reproduced more, passed that asymmetry to every generation that followed. You are the descendant of every human being who ever survived by being more afraid of loss than excited by gain. That fear is your inheritance, and it is making your financial decisions right now, in ways you are not aware of. Here is the first experiment. Two groups of people are given a choice. Group A, receive $50 guaranteed, or take a coin flip for $100. Most people choose the guaranteed 50. Even though mathematically both options have identical expected value, the certain gain feels safer than the uncertain equivalent. Now Group B, lose $50 guaranteed, or take a coin flip where you might lose 100, or lose nothing. Most people take the gamble, to avoid the certain loss, even though, again, both options have identical expected value. Risk-averse when it comes to gains, risk-seeking when it comes to losses. The same person, the same brain, behaving in opposite ways depending on how the choice is framed. This is called the framing effect, and it is why the financial industry spends enormous resources on the exact words used to present choices to you, not the options, the words around the options, because the words determine which brain system processes the choice. And that determines the outcome. Kahneman called the two systems of thinking System 1 and System 2. System 1 is fast, automatic, emotional, associative. System 2 is slow, deliberate, logical, effortful. Financial decisions feel like System 2. They feel deliberate and rational, but the research shows they are almost entirely driven by System 1. System 1 makes the call. System 2 writes the justification afterwards, and you experience it as reasoning. This is not a metaphor. In 2008, neuroscientist John Dylan Haynes demonstrated that brain scanners could predict which button a person was about to press up to 10 seconds before the person was consciously aware of their intention. 10 seconds. The decision existed in the brain before the mind knew it had decided. Your sense of deliberation is real, but it may be post hoc narration rather than actual causation. Now apply this to every financial decision you have ever made. Every time you thought you were weighing options. Every time you felt like you were in control. The science suggests that the decision was already forming before the deliberation began. The deliberation was the story you told yourself about a conclusion that was already being reached. But here's where it gets more specific. Because loss aversion doesn't operate uniformly, it operates through reference points. And those reference points were set in your childhood. Your brain has a number, a financial baseline, An amount of money that feels like normal, like the level you are supposed to have. Everything above it feels like a gain. Everything below it feels like a loss. That number wasn't set by logic. It was set by observation, by what you saw growing up, by what felt normal in the household you came from. If the baseline is high, being wealthy feels like staying even. If the baseline is low, reaching wealth can feel dangerous, like being somewhere you're not supposed to be. This is called the set point theory of financial comfort, and it explains something that conventional financial advice has never been able to explain. Why lottery winners return to their previous financial level within 5 years in the majority of documented cases. Why people who go bankrupt often rebuild to a comparable level within the same time frame. Not always, but consistently enough to be a measurable pattern. The brain is not trying to maximize wealth, it is trying to return to familiar. The familiar was set before you had any say in the matter. There is a second hidden variable operating alongside loss aversion. It is called mental accounting, and it is the reason you behave as if you have multiple different budgets that don't communicate with each other. Money is fungible. $1 is worth $1 regardless of where it comes from or what it is earmarked for. This is mathematically obvious and behaviorally irrelevant. People who would never spend $200 from their savings account will spend the same amount without hesitation if it comes from a bonus or a tax refund. Same amount, same value, different mental account, different emotional permission structure, different decision. The financial industry has understood mental accounting for decades. It is why bonuses exist as a separate payment rather than being folded into salary. It is why cashback rewards feel like free money. It is why credit cards work at all. The physical separation of payment from purchase eliminates the pain of paying. Researchers at MIT demonstrated that people pay up to 100% more for the same item when using a credit card versus cash. Not because they want to pay more, because the credit card removes the neurological signal that registers loss. The pain response doesn't fire in the same way. Now consider that almost all modern financial transactions, digital payments, subscriptions, automatic renewals, are specifically designed to minimize that pain signal. Every design decision in financial technology is an intervention in your nervous system. The one-click purchase, the stored card details, the subscription that renews silently. These are not conveniences. They are surgical removals of the friction that your loss aversion system uses to protect you from spending. There is a third variable, perhaps the most powerful of all. It is called social comparison, and it is running constantly in the background of every financial decision you make. Humans do not evaluate wealth in absolute terms. We evaluate it in relative terms. Not am I doing well, but am I doing better or worse than the people around me? This was demonstrated conclusively by an experiment at Harvard. Participants were asked to choose between two scenarios. Scenario A, you earn $50,000 per year. Everyone around you earns $25,000. Scenario B, you earn $100,000 per year. Everyone around you earns $200,000. The majority of participants chose scenario A, $50,000 with relative advantage over $100,000 with relative disadvantage. They chose to be poorer in absolute terms in order to be richer in relative terms. This is not irrational in evolutionary terms. In a tribal environment, relative status determined access to resources, mates, and survival advantages. Absolute wealth was meaningless if it didn't translate into social position. But in a modern economy, it drives behavior that actively works against financial well-being. Lifestyle inflation, luxury purchases that signal rather than satisfy, debt taken on to maintain appearances. Keeping up with the Joneses is not a character flaw, it is a neurological program running exactly as designed. The Joneses are your threat assessment system telling you that your status position is at risk. And threat assessment in the human nervous system overrides deliberate reasoning every time. Now consider social media, which has specifically engineered your social comparison system to fire continuously against a curated sample of people who represent the top of your reference group. Your ancestors compared themselves to perhaps 150 people over the course of a lifetime. You compare yourself to thousands every day, most of them showing you their peaks, not their averages. The result is a permanently recalibrated reference point. Your brain's financial baseline keeps moving upward, and loss aversion fires every time you fall short of it. This is the architecture of financial dissatisfaction. Not poverty, not poor decisions. A nervous system responding exactly as designed to an environment it was never designed for. There is a fourth variable. It operates at an even deeper level than loss aversion, mental accounting, or social comparison. It is called temporal discounting, and it may be the most consequential of all. Temporal discounting is the tendency to value things in the present more than identical things in the future. $100 today feels worth more than $100 in a year, even when interest rates make them objectively different in the opposite direction. The experiment that demonstrated this most clearly was conducted with children. A marshmallow, a choice. Wait 15 minutes and receive 2 marshmallows, or eat this one now. The original Stanford marshmallow study showed that children who waited tended to have better life outcomes. Higher academic achievement, lower BMI, better financial management decades later. But subsequent research complicated this. The ability to wait was not purely willpower, it was trust. Children from unstable environments, where delayed promises were often broken, ate the marshmallow immediately, rationally. If your environment taught you that the future is unreliable, your brain learned to discount it heavily. To take what is available now, because later may not deliver. That programming runs in adults, in boardrooms, in investment decisions, in retirement planning. In every situation where the question is whether to accept a smaller gain now or a larger gain later. The financial system is not neutral on this. It is specifically structured to exploit temporal discounting. Buy now, pay later, 0% interest for 12 months, minimum monthly payment. Each of these is a technology for amplifying your natural preference for the present over the future. They work because temporal discounting is not a choice. It is a default setting, and default settings in both technology and neuroscience are almost never changed by the average user. Now we need to talk about something that makes all of this significantly worse. Scarcity mindset. And the research around it is some of the most important work done in behavioral economics in the last 20 years. Sendil Mullainathan and Eldar Shafir, in their book Scarcity, documented something remarkable. Financial scarcity, not having enough money, consumes cognitive bandwidth, measurably, quantifiably. They found that people experiencing financial stress showed cognitive impairment equivalent to losing 13 IQ points, or functioning on 1 full night less of sleep, not because poor people are less intelligent, but because worrying about money consumes the cognitive resources that would otherwise be available for decision-making. The people who most need to make good financial decisions are operating with the least cognitive capacity to make them, because the scarcity itself is consuming the bandwidth. This creates a trap. Scarcity impairs decision-making. Impaired decision-making perpetuates scarcity. The conventional advice, just make better decisions, misses the point entirely. Better decisions require cognitive bandwidth. Cognitive bandwidth is consumed by scarcity. You cannot think your way out of a system designed to prevent clear thinking. Now consider what this means for the standard narrative around financial failure. The story we tell about why people end up in financial difficulty. The standard narrative is moral. People spend too much. They lack discipline. They don't plan. They make poor choices. The solution is better behavior. But the science tells a different story. One where the behavior is the output of neural systems that evolved for an entirely different environment, being exploited by institutions that understand those systems better than the individuals do. The financial industry employs behavioral economists. Their job is to use the research, Kahneman's research, Thaler's research, Ariely's research, to design products that predictably extract money from people using their own psychological architecture against them. Richard Thaler won the Nobel Prize in 2017 for his work on nudge theory, the science of designing choice environments to steer decisions without restricting options. Governments use nudge theory to increase retirement savings. Insurance companies use nudge theory to increase policy uptake. Casinos have used versions of it for a century. No clocks, no windows, chips instead of cash, free drinks that impair System 2, sounds and lights that reward System 1. Every element is a behavioral intervention. In the stock market, which most people interact with through screens that show real-time price movements, percentage changes, and red and green color coding that triggers loss aversion on a minute-by-minute basis. Research shows that investors who check their portfolios daily make significantly worse decisions than those who check quarterly, not because of information, because of the emotional activation that comes with high-frequency loss exposure. Every red number activates loss aversion. Every activation nudges toward a decision. Most of those decisions are wrong in the long term, and the system is designed knowing this. So what do you do with this? Because the question isn't just interesting, it's practical. These systems are operating in you right now. The first thing the research suggests is that awareness has limited power. Knowing about loss aversion does not eliminate it. Kahneman himself said he continued to make the same cognitive errors after decades of studying them. You cannot think your way out of System 1. It is faster than thought. It has already decided before you begin deliberating. What you can do is design your environment so that System 1's automatic decisions align with your long-term interests. This is what Thaler called choice architecture. Automatic transfers to savings that happen before you see the money. Default opt-in to retirement contributions. Removing saved card details from shopping sites that trigger impulsive purchases. Not willpower. Architecture. Designing the default so that the automatic decision is the right one. Because the automatic decision is the one that will actually be made. The second intervention is reframing. Because loss aversion responds to framing, it can be redirected by framing. Instead of framing retirement savings as money you are losing now, frame it as the cost of not buying financial insecurity. The loss framing activates the same system, but in service of the long-term decision. The third is the most counterintuitive. Reduce the information you consume about your finances, not increase it. Specifically, reduce high-frequency financial information. Check your long-term investments quarterly, not daily. Set up automated payments and then create distance from the transaction stream. The less frequently loss aversion is triggered, the fewer bad decisions it drives. But here is the honest conclusion. These interventions help. They are evidence-based. They are used by people who understand this research and apply it consistently. And they are still operating inside a system that has resources, research, and algorithmic precision working continuously to override them. The game is not fair, and pretending that individual behavior is the primary variable is itself a choice that serves the system. The most useful thing you can take from this is not a technique. It is a different understanding of what is happening when you make a financial decision. You are not a rational agent making free choices. You are a nervous system shaped by evolution, conditioned by childhood, influenced by social comparison, and operating in an environment that was designed by people who know this better than you do. That is not a counsel of despair. It is the beginning of an accurate map. And you cannot navigate terrain you refuse to see clearly. The hidden variable that controls your financial decisions is not a character flaw. It is not laziness or weakness or irrationality. It is a biological system doing exactly what it was built to do, in the wrong environment, at the wrong time, against opponents who have studied it far longer than you have. Knowing this doesn't fix it, but not knowing it guarantees that it runs unchallenged. And unchallenged systems, in neuroscience as in everything else, always win.